Today's topic is going to be about the subject of social media and human communication on social media. Now, this covers a very wide range of subjects, and I don't intend to bring all of them into this particular video. Um, but rather, I want to talk about or discuss how people communicate on social media in contrast or in possible contrast to how they would communicate in real life. Just to give a little bit of background, I've been active on social media now for quite a long time. I've been on Facebook for about 8 years. I've been on YouTube on and off. I've had to change account a few times because of technical problems for about 5 years. Um, I've kind of went on Twitter, but very lapsed. I hardly ever use it. I don't see a great deal of point with Twitter because a lot of people end up in hot water with things they've said. It seems to be more so than in other social media groups. You rarely hear politicians or celebrities getting in trouble because of something they said on YouTube or Facebook. It's almost always Twitter. So I find that intriguing. Um, yeah, I want to just talk here about my own experience and also perhaps what others might how they might find social media in this situation. Generally speaking, the sort of things that I say online and certainly the subjects I raise in these videos would be consistent with my real life thinking. You'll notice that I use the name Nathan Hazlett as my channel. Well, that is actually my real name. And some people would say that's foolish to put my real name on my network because a lot of people use fake names, and I'm not judging them, incidentally. I don't care. But I'm just saying that I do this because I've got nothing to hide. This is who I am. This is my views. I think it would be a little bit naive to say that there's absolutely no difference between how we communicate online and how we communicate in a face-to-face discussion. Obviously, in this format, I can just speak without being interrupted and just talk like that, say what I want to say. Um, Generally speaking, I don't particularly I don't enjoy confrontations. I don't enjoy arguments. Some people have this ability to just really get into them and really seem to enjoy them. I I don't avoid them because I think sometimes if someone is saying something I believe is just plain wrong, I will challenge them. If they're challenging me, of course, I'll defend myself. By and large, though, I genuinely can say I don't seek arguments, but that doesn't mean I avoid them either. I don't actively go online and think, oh, it's going to be too awkward to say that, or it's going to be too difficult to say this, or this person's intimidating or something. I don't let myself be intimidated online, although in truth, the thing about social media is you can turn the computer off at any time. Obviously, in the real world, that's one big difference. If you're in a confrontational situation, it could end up in a heated shouting contest or even a physical situation. Um, Social media, I think, can have benefits insofar as helping to branch out, helping to share ideas. But let's not pretend that there isn't a negative aspect as well. And I have to admit, I've probably spent more time than was necessary getting myself into situations with back and forth arguments on not stupid issues, they were always important issues, but basically I do regret on some level spending so much time on that. And from now on, I'm going to try and not avoid it completely, but spend less time on it and try to spend more time on positive energy on social media. Um, I mean, the responses to my videos tend to be for the most part positive, and that's good. Obviously, it encourages me. Where there is people who disagree with me, so long as it's respectful, that's fine. Um, Occasionally, I've had unpleasant messages. I have had a number of situations over the years that have been unpleasant, and it has got me in low spirits at times. Not about my own opinion, but simply because I can't be bothered with it. Um, And if I'm being completely honest, I'm not going to say I'm entirely innocent so far as if I've seen an objectionable post or an objectionable video, I'm not going to say that I've never had my say as well. So I'm sure people might also perceive me as being confrontational. I don't think I am, but I guess I am opinionated. I mean, I give my opinions in all of these videos, but I also try to give the caveat of being as objective as possible. Um, Anyway, the reason I'm making this is to raise some of these issues. I'd like to ask my subscribers or anyone watching this, do you think that there is a difference between how people communicate online and how they communicate in the real world? Incidentally, I don't think this is always a bad thing. There's a perception that it's kind of cowardly and it's kind of insincere. We have to remember that in some situations people have no choice, especially if they're in a country where there's political turmoil going on, or there is people who have to use an alternative name because it is literally dangerous to be open with themselves. So they cannot do what I'm doing right now. I mean, I feel no physical threats in making these videos. I might sometimes get into awkward arguments, but I honestly feel no physical threats. But there are parts of the world where if I was saying something contentious, there would actually be a physical threat possible. So I don't blame some people for. I remember I used to speak to a Pakistani girl on Facebook. We're no longer connected, but she never showed a picture of herself. She always used like pictures of flowers or stuff like that. And I remember I asked her about that one day, and she said it was a cultural thing. It was because of obviously Pakistan's a very religiously conservative country, and there's other people I've known online. Well, I can't really say I've known them, but I've communicated with them, and there was a time a few years ago when I thought, oh well, I'm not going to trust anyone who's not prepared to show their face and who's not prepared to use their real name. But as someone who uses social media regularly, I do understand why some people are in that situation, why they don't want to do that. I don't think it's cowardly. I think in some situations it's practical. Although I've no respect for somebody who, for example, disrespects an athlete, especially in the boxing world, and hides behind a fake username or their, I've no respect for that sort of attitude. But what I'm talking about is people who have political opinions and they need to maybe use an alternative name as a security method. I totally understand that. Um, in terms of do we say the things that we say online in the real world? Well, it's interesting to look at some public figures who have said politically incorrect or controversial things online, and then when a journalist has confronted them about it, they've backtracked or said it was taken out of context, or this sort of thing. Um, for me, it's a very intriguing thing, and it is a product of two aspects. Firstly, is political correctness, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Secondly, is insincerity and perhaps a lack of conviction on their part. Now, I take the view that if you're a public figure, you should be consistent in what you believe in. If you really genuinely find that you change your views, I don't think that's a bad thing. But you should be honest about it and say, I've changed my thinking about this, not backtrack and say, oh, that was taken out of context, or I don't believe this. Um, on the other hand, I don't believe that people should expect public figures to always be so politically correct and please everyone. I've got more respect for a politician who says something I don't want to hear rather than a politician who says really nice words and then enacts a policy that I disagree with. So I would prefer to have a politician who says something that pisses me off rather than a politician who says something really polite and, oh, we don't really mean this, but then goes ahead and legislates for a policy that represents a very sort of attitude that I dislike. So I think people need to be consistent. Now, I mentioned political correctness. Um, I One thing I would say, I don't agree with this sort of trend that if someone has once said something politically incorrect on social media, they should automatically be disqualified from public office. Um, Quite often when this happens, they say, "Oh, I was young at the time, I was naive," or they say it was taken out of context. In my view, we need public officials who are what they are, and then people can choose whether or not they support them. Um, I've, like I said, been active on social media for 5 years, and there's been times when I've been angry and I've said some pretty heated things, and let's just say sometimes they were less than diplomatic. Now, I've never said childish, crude things, but I have said some heated things at times. And looking back at some of the things I've said, I don't necessarily, I don't regret the principle behind those things, but maybe the wording I could have worded a little bit better. But if I then wanted to run for public office, and then some journalist with nothing better to do finds one comment on one video made 5 years ago, and they're like, "Oh, Nathan Hayes that said this at this time." Well, I'd like to think I was man enough to just say, "Yeah, I did," and that's what I believed at that time. And maybe I've changed my view on whatever that was. The truth is, I've made so many comments on YouTube, I can't remember half of them. I always think about what I say. It's just that sometimes I will let my frustration show in the comment. But I always think about what I say. Um, and I really do try to be consistent. So I don't agree with this attitude that just because someone has said something politically incorrect online, then they should be disqualified from public office. Now, clearly, there's some common sense things. If someone had said something blatantly racist, blatantly sexist, or blatantly homophobic, I don't think they should be forbidden from saying it. But if they're in a public office, it is right that they're challenged on that position. I've no problem with that. But I don't think it should necessarily. Well, this is a double-edged sword because on one hand, if they're a public figure, especially if they're, for example, the head of a school board or they're a CEO of some sort of public service, or if they're a politician leading a major political party, and they have a certain attitude towards a particular group that is very negative and very hostile, and is generalizing that group, then it is right that they're challenged. But all I'm saying is that we shouldn't, the world should not turn upside down every time a controversial comment arises that someone, a public figure, may have made a few years ago. I think that's ridiculous. I mean, I'll give an example about this. It's a topical example. We have a new MP in the UK. She's only 20 years old, Mary Black. She's a member of the SNP. Now, just to be abundantly clear, I have no respect for that party or what they stand for. I believe in one United Kingdom. I don't want Scotland to break away. Well, this this MP, she's our youngest MP in 300 years. She said some rather childish and crude comments 6 years ago on social media. Now, she was 14 when she said those things, and they were pretty stupid things. She spoke about wanting to nut people who were in different political parties. Um, they're stupid things to say, but I actually disagree with the premise that because she said those things, she should be disqualified from ever seeking public office. Because my response to that would be, well, yeah, it was stupid and it demonstrates an unpleasant way of thinking. But she was 14 at the time, so I do think that has to be taken into consideration. Now, if you have a 50-year-old or 40-year-old sitting MP or public figure who says something when they're in office, and that something has nothing to do with a particular policy area, it's simply a rant at a group of people they don't like, then I think there could be a case for their job being on the line. Or if they represent, representative of a company or something. But what I also am wary of is if we get to a point where we all have to be super polite and super diplomatic all the time, I do think there's a space on social media for heated words. I do think there's a space on social media for people to vent angry sentiments. Um, Clearly, that's different from specifically trying to stir up hatred against a specific group. Um, so, very, very important that we differentiate with these things. And just to be clear, with the Mary Black example, I don't particularly like her, and I certainly don't support her party. But there are some unionists who are obsessing a little bit about this. And I would say, well, look, can any of you honestly claim that you've never said something rash online? Because the truth is, a lot of people have. And if we exclude everybody who has ever made an angry, rash comment on cyberspace from ever holding public office, then we're only going to have a generation of sort of Stepford wives, manicured, factory production line type parliamentarians. What I mean by that is it's sort of getting at this idea that we want these polished figures who have no faults. That's ridiculous. I want a politician who is human, and of course politicians are human. But the point I'm making there is they shouldn't always have to censor themselves. And I'm talking about politicians, but I think this goes for every public figure. People are who they are, and if people don't like them, that's fine. Um, but I don't think that we, it's not progressive to be in a situation where people are constantly censoring themselves in case the professionally offended decide to make a big issue out of it. And by the same token, people have a right to be offended and well, not a right to be offended actually, but a right to express frustration at being offended. There's not a right to be offended in the sense no one can say, I'm offended, therefore you can't say this. Um, but basically, for my own part, if I ever become a public figure, I know I've been active on social media for a long time. I know there's a lot of things that I've said. I'm an ambitious person. I may well end up as a public figure. And if some tabloid journalist with nothing better to do finds an old comment I made that was less than diplomatic, I'll look at it and I'll say, I'll base it on whatever the comment is. I'll say, yeah, at that time I was angry. I made this comment, and I'll explain why. I'll say, yes, that was my opinion at this time. I've changed my opinion now. I'll say, yeah, that's what I said, and I still believe that, and I'll explain why. Um, I don't think public figures should make it worse for themselves by denying if they said something, especially if it's presented to them. But I also don't have a great deal of respect for people who have nothing better to do with the time than dig up something someone said years ago. I mean, I can understand it could be important if it directly relates to, for example, how a powerful person interacts with those they serve. I can understand that. But what I'm talking about here is when a sleazy tabloid or a loser paparazzo type journalist digs up something completely trivial that a celebrity may, in terms of, especially in terms of relationships, and they dig it up and they say, "Oh, what do you think about this?" I would love to just put that journalist on the spot and say, "Wait a second, can you honestly say you've never said anything stupid? Can you honestly say you've never had angry sentiments or whatever?" Every human being has those sentiments. So I think it's a bit dishonest, quite frankly, to suggest that everyone should always be super diplomatic all the time. Diplomacy has its place. It certainly has its place, but we have to allow a space for people to be offensive if that is simply them expressing their genuine conviction about something. What offends one person might be an honest conviction to another person. So let me know your thoughts on this. And just to be clear, I'm not in any way saying that we should tolerate hate, hatred, genuine racism, genuine sexism, or genuine homophobia. I'm not saying that we should tolerate that. But what I'm saying is that social media, I don't think is that alien, or it shouldn't be that alien from a real world society. It's part of society, actually. Whether we like it or not, it has become part of how human beings communicate. So there shouldn't really be a gulf between how people communicate online and how they communicate face to face. I understand there's some situations people can't be that confrontational, but anyway, it's an interesting thing to discuss. Finally, for my own part, I try to be consistent. The things I say online, if I was ever in a situation of a discussion or a debate in real life, I'd be prepared to say the same things. Um, and I have done actually. I have been in face-to-face debates where I've obviously some of the things that I've talked about I couldn't say face to face. I mean, if I make a video about Islamic State and I say, oh, they're ruthless terrorists, well, clearly I'm not going to go up to an IS terrorist and say, I think you're despicable, because he'll blow my head off. So, obviously there's some practical things here, but I think the general message is quite obvious. Um, that's it. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you.